Hello, and welcome back to episode 2 of Chiff Chat, the organ podcast, with me, Ben Blore. There's been a fantastic response to the first episode. It's lovely to know I've not just been talking to myself. Thank you very much to everyone who tuned in. Please spread the word to all your friends, family, fellow convicts, so we can get even more listeners for my new cult. Happy podcast family. Now, today's guest can talk for England. I hadn't known him that long when we recorded this, but he's so friendly and chatty that A, I thought he'd be a perfect fit for this podcast, but also B, it became apparent very quickly that he didn't really need anyone else in a room to be able to hold a conversation. But I will say that this is where the rot started to set in with my podcasting abilities. I was so excited to record this one. I didn't get my levels right, so on the original audio file, you can hear Tom very clearly, but I sound like a right old whispering William, locked in a cupboard 2 rooms away. So I had to do a bit of post-production ADR, which stands for I done it wrong. No, not really. It stands for automated dialogue replacement, which basically means I had to re-record most of my lines and shoehorn them in. So I hope that's not too jarring to listen to. I'm sorry, I told you I wasn't very good at this. Anyway, you don't need to hear about all that boring behind-the-scenes technical stuff. You're here for more organ chat. Here's a question. What are the 2 best things in the world? The answer is, of course, organs and pizza. I was talking to a friend at work a few weeks ago, and he asked me if I'd heard of this place in the States where you go along to a pizza restaurant and there's an organ in there, and you listen to organ music while you eat your deep dish. And I'd never heard of it, so I went home and looked it up, and sure enough, it's a place called Organ Stop Pizza in Arizona that's been running for more than 50 years, and they've got a huge theatre organ which is played for the guests every night. Anyway, this is what their website says. Each night in Mesa, Arizona, the largest theatre pipe organ ever created rises above the audience on an 8,000-pound rotating hydraulic elevator to sit 10 feet above the 700-seat dining room. The organ has 1,074 keys, buttons and switches linked to a series of xylophones, glockenspiels, gongs and cymbals to create the sound of a full orchestra. Nightly shows also include dancing marionette cats, disco balls and spectacular light shows. Crikey. While diners sup below, good verb there, 4 industrial blowers pump pressurised, that's spelt wrong, air through the 6,000 pipes of the 1927 Wurlitzer organ, which is insured for $5 million. The Performance Hall restaurant serves 300,000 visitors each year, while the organ plays classics like The Flight of the Bumblebee, Star Wars, and of course, God Bless America. So how cool is that? I don't know much about theatre organs myself, but just looking at the stop list, they've got a saxophone, grand piano, police whistle, Acme siren, horse hooves, doorbell, and a stop that's just called Duck. So you can't argue with that, really. The pizzas look amazing too, by the way. It sounds like my idea of organ heaven, to be honest. So if any of you listeners are in Arizona, you know where to go. If I were any sort of good writer, I'd finish this section with a pun that gave a nice link between pizzas and organ. But the best I can come up with is a box, like a pizza box and a swell box. I don't know, the raw materials are there, you do the work. Coming up at the end of this episode, I'll be checking my inbox, if I can remember the password, to see all your lovely messages. I'll boot up my old Windows 98 computer now, so it should be ready to go by the outro. Don't forget, if you'd like to write in, why don't you? Send me an email to podcast@chiffchat.com. That's podcast@chiffchat.com. Have you been to Organ Stop Pizza and can you recommend it? Does the combination of principles and pepperoni deliver a sort of Nirvana-like experience? I need to know. Right, I think we've strung out this intro long enough. Now for the next 50 minutes or so, you're going to be hearing my voice, but also the voice of someone else. Don't be alarmed, that's the format of the show. Here's the podcast. Hello, you've made it onto the podcasty bit of the podcast. What podcast is it? Well, it's Chiff Chat, the organ podcast. But you already know that because Future Ben told you in the intro. I can feel the presence of another human in the room. That's because there is another human in the room. My special guest today has been described as invigorating, compelling, and brilliant. Not my words, but the words of others. As a freelance organist, he has many strings to his bow, or whatever the organ equivalent is, including being the director of the RCO for the North of England. He has a particular interest in performing modern organ music and is an all-round good egg. Hello, Tom Bell.
Hello, Ben.
Now, unlike David Pipe, who is the perfect case of nominative determinism for an organist, you have a name that's only on the periphery of organ terminology. So give me one good reason why we ought to talk about organs rather than campanology.
Because I have pretty much never rung a bell in my life.
You want to? No, it's fun.
I can imagine it, yeah.
I had a friend at school who rang bells in a church, and I had to go once, and it's I'm not very good at it. It's quite tricky. No, quite heavy.
You would be. Actually, my parents are both bell ringers these days.
Really?
Yeah, so I think there's something going on there.
Musical family.
Musical family. But my own bell ringing is restricted to the family cat when I was a kid, who was trained to come running for food when a little bell was rung.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Good. Okay, straight out the gate, Tom, I want to ask you about your fascination with new music for the organ. What is it that appeals to you? Isn't it often quite a difficult learning process? And just generally, are you okay?
Yeah. You know what? I've always been interested in let's say the 20th and 21st century repertoire. It's always caught my attention. I can remember having an organ lesson fairly early on with Michael Harris, who's now at St Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh. In fact, it's been there for quite a long time now. But he gave me a little piece of Hakim, actually. It was the first of the Marialas. And I just sort of learnt it really fast.
Yeah.
And it just sort of sat well with me. And I've always found it quite easy to learn new music, which is not to say I sort of breeze through the sort of fairly obvious sort of technical challenges that you get. And, obviously sometimes you sweat blood over these things, but on some level it's easy. I guess I've just got a sort of zest for it or something like that. But and intellectually I don't have a struggle with it. I find it far harder learning, I don't know, like Counterpoint by Rager or something.
It's interesting that. Yeah, so maybe you're wired in a certain way.
I think it's that. It's definitely that.
Okay. So you play a lot of new music written by a lot of different composers with different styles and different outlooks on composition, including, I assume, some composers who aren't organists. Are there occasions where you collaborate with non-organist composers to help them understand the complex nature of the organ?
Yeah, I've done a few things. I've worked with musicians who aren't organists, collaborating in the creation of new music. I work with beatboxers and I work with a folk fiddler called Sarah Hatch. And
well done for saying that correctly.
Yeah.
Let's beat that out.
Yeah. So Sarah and I work together. So, I mean, that's not sort of composing, but it is arranging and improvising and all the rest of it. So there's that sort of stuff. But I actually like working with composers who aren't organists, and I like playing music by composers who aren't organists, because I think sometimes an organist might be more conservative. Not necessarily all the time, you can't accuse Messiaen of being conservative, for example. Sometimes a non-organist will give you an instruction like, I don't know, nasal or hollow or something like that. And you just have to sort of find a way around it. And the same with some of the technical things. I've rarely had a serious problem translating a score by somebody who doesn't know much about the organ.
Well, I was going to ask you, is there a difference between something being difficult and just written badly?
I think there probably is. I can think of one or two pieces I've got scores for, which I haven't got around to playing. It's just, it's sometimes it's not so much that it's badly written, it's just that the knowledge isn't there. So I don't know, the pedal line's written at sounding pitch, so it's got like 1 million ledger lines or something like that. So, so you've got to read the whole thing up an octave. And it's just not particularly easy on the eye. And there are certain textures which might not work on the organ really, and so then they're just awkward to learn. I'm not so sure how many pieces I've played which I would really say were badly written, although there are some pieces I like more than others.
I wasn't trying to draw you out or anything, but I bet you must get some right tat thrown your way. What do you look for then in a good new composition? What's really fulfilling for you? You see a new piece and you think, that's written really well.
You know what? I'm not so sure I've got a clear answer to that, because and I cite as an example a piece which I actually recorded. In fact, I asked one of my friends at college, this is going right back, I did a new music CD right at the beginning of my career, and asked various composer friends to write something. And one of these people composed a piece which, frankly, when it first arrived, the score and the kind of, I don't know, the CD-ROM of Sibelius playing it, the software playing it on a terrible organ sound, I just thought, oh, what you've done, this just isn't what I was hoping for. And then the piece, it just came alive as I learnt it, and I realised, actually, this is a fantastic piece. And it remains one of my favourite pieces from that particular project. But that kind of first glimpse of it, probably coloured by the terrible sort of digital recording thing from the back of a laptop somewhere. But my first meeting with it, I just didn't see it for what it was.
Sure.
And I think there are other times when I feel enormously enthusiastic at the start of something, and then it sort of wanes. So I'm not so sure I've got a clear answer.
No,
and I quite like that process of discovery, by the way.
I
think that's part of it for me.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in some competitions, and there's often commissioned pieces, and you see them for the first time, and you think, oh God, this is going to be one of those kind of ones. But actually, you find you either go one of two ways with it. You really don't get on with it, or you actually sort of get under the skin into the DNA and start to really sort of understand what's going on with.
finding a shape for something, beyond just learning the dots. I mean, I know that's a process we'll go through with any piece, but if you've got nothing to go on, this is a composer whose work you haven't come across before, etc., etc. That process of discovery is really, really fun.
Not sure if you can help with this, but what should people do if they want to commission something? I mean, money makes the world go round, so presumably that's step one?
I think probably step one is find a composer whose work you enjoy, regardless of whether they've written for the organ before, and ask them if they fancy writing an organ piece. And it might be that you need to sort of guide them through the process if writing for the organ is completely new. But that's fine. Then it becomes sort of a collaboration in a way. And if they want to try out ideas with you, again, that's fun. So I think, sorry, again, not the most deep digging of answers, really. Find something you like and ask for more of it. I mean, it's sort of almost like going to Waitrose or Stainsbury's.
Tried and true. I mean, that's great, yeah. So you mentioned beatboxing. I was going to ask you about that. What was the music like? Quite rhythmical, presumably?
Yeah, quite sort of hip-hop inspired, although there's other stuff in there as well. Very rhythmical, but with free sections.
Okay.
Sort of free, sort of improvised sections. I mean, beatboxers obviously produce all these amazing...
Yeah, could you do some for us now? Were you on the organ? Hang on.
I was on the organ.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, I've got the wrong person.
I know. I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. Actually, funnily enough, I'm not going to do it now. But I did, during a rehearsal, as I was, I don't know, tying my shoelaces or something before the rehearsal, I just caught myself beatboxing to myself exactly, or something like that. And the beatboxer said, just caught me doing it and just looked at me and said, addictive, innit?
Yeah.
Because it is. But no, so it was very rhythmical. But like I say, there were these sections where we sort of traded noises and shapes and so on and so forth. And that was really good fun, and having to think quite quickly. Because it's amazing the range of sounds like a good beatboxer can produce, totally. And timbre and all the rest of it. And so being able to respond to that quickly, inventing a registration or a texture or something just on the spot like that was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
You're particularly drawn to the music of Olivier Messiaen, and indeed you seem to be on your way to learning the whole blooming lot of it. I remember hearing Les Burgers from La Nativité being played at the end of a service in Derby when I was a wee chorister.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard anything like it. It had a really strong effect on me and shaped what organ music I wanted to learn as a teenager. And strangely, it's still touted as modern music today, but a lot of it, I mean, some of the early stuff will soon be 100 years old. What is it about his music that speaks to you?
So visceral, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's from the heart. It's so colourful. It's so dynamic. It encapsulates one of the things I really like about modern music, actually, which is, I mean, I realise that to some extent this is true of any composer, but particularly in the 20th century and these days, there are so many options for a composer musically, aren't there? And so you have such a huge range. Take Peter Maxwell Davies, great example of that. On the one hand, you've got, just in the organ repertoire, you've got his Fantasia on O Manda Mysterium from 1961, which is, you need to think twice before you play it to an audience, or you need to introduce it well. I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic piece, but it's not easy listening. On the other hand, you got Farewell to Stromness and Orkney Wedding with Sunrise, whatever it's called, which are kind of classic FM staples. So, and I think to an extent with Messiaen, you have that. You've got the Leave Dog at one end of the scale, and then I don't know, L'Ascension or something at the other, which is far more approachable. The spiritual force of his music, the fact that he's painting pictures the whole time. No, I do. It really fires me up. I really feel very much at home playing it. And again, that's one of those things that's sort of been there since I was quite young. I just happened to come across a couple of pieces and they sort of really struck me.
Yeah.
And so I've always been interested in his music, although playing it has sort of gone in waves. You have to have the opportunity. So I went through a period when I didn't play much particularly often, just because I wasn't, I don't know, regularly playing an organ that inspired me to learn it, and then therefore I wasn't programming it in concerts.
I've got to say,
I've dropped off Messiaen a little bit in recent years, but I'm looking forward to reinvigorating my interest in his music when it happens. I think you're right, these things sort of come in waves. So just alluding to what you said, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but occasionally do you not think I'm asking quite a lot of my audience? to sit through what is, to the layman in 2023, quite tricky music to sell? Or is there something about Messiaen in particular that you think appeals to the human condition?
Poncy way of saying that.
Well, I think in some ways there probably is something, although I guess you could say that about the work of any great composer. I like in my programming to sort of make sure that there's a... If I'm going to play something that's challenging, I want to make sure I've balanced it with other things which are less challenging. I want to make sure that there are connections between the pieces that I'm playing. And sometimes I go as far as trying to come up with a theme or even a narrative. And into that you can drop, into that sort of structure, you could play anything. But also sometimes with the bigger pieces, you're probably likely, they're a special event. So I think that's a slightly different matter. You can say to people, this is a performance of the Livre de Saint-Sacrement. And people know what they're getting themselves into. But I do have a set of program notes I wrote for that piece, for example, which aim, and I'm told are successful, to make the whole thing much more approachable to somebody who is unfamiliar with the style. Right. Just picking 2 or 3 features of that particular movement and what they mean, and points the listener towards them, things to listen out for. That's that sort of thing, and I think that can work wonders. But again, something like the Livre d'Orgue, probably difficult to get into the average recital program.
Do you play that Eyes in the Wheel piece?
Gosh, it's terrifying.
There's no patterns in it. I've picked it up off the shelf and thought, why would I?
No, there are no patterns. No, not only that, but I did a Messiaen elective when I was part of my academic studies at Conservatoire with somebody who was a specialist in such things, and we did some analysis of, or he presented to us his analysis of, or other people's analyses of various pieces of Messiaen, Messiaen's own analyses in some cases, and with the Eyes and the Wheels, that's what he said. He said that it's just he couldn't discern anything. Nobody can discern anything. But what a fantastic picture of that terrifying image from Ezekiel. I mean, that's the thing. It's absolutely wild. I did play it as a final voluntary once at a church where I worked.
How did that go down?
I warned them.
They came up to you and said, "You're right, Tom."
Well, they probably did. But I did. The congregation were forewarned, so they knew what it was. Which perhaps spoiled my fun a little bit. Perhaps I shouldn't have been quite so responsible. Perhaps I should have just played it. But it's so hard. Yeah. It's so hard. It's one of the hardest pieces there are, I think.
Yeah, I suppose at some point you just need to weigh up, is the impressive end result worth the effort and agony it takes to go through learning it? Now, I don't want to pigeonhole you into being the modern music mogul. You're more than a one-trick pony. You've got an interest in 19th century performance practice too, notably the compositions and I assume arrangements of W.T. Best.
Well, this is Bach edition was the starting point for that. So it's just simply that, again, I can't really remember exactly the sort of the timeline here, but I discovered how wonderful an English 19th century organ can be. Be it a Father Willis or a Lewis. Oh my gosh, his organs are amazing. Or Hill or whatever. Lewis gets my vote above all. But and weirdly, actually, this is going to sound so kind of, I don't know, pedestrian or something. But I played for a friend's choir for a weekend of services at Salisbury. This is a million years ago, and they sang all sorts of stuff, including that old pot boiler, Walmsley in D. And of course, whenever I've ever come across that piece, or page turn for somebody else accompanying it, they just go through the thumb pistons like you would playing Stanford or Howells or anything. But actually, there were very specific registration instructions there. It was terraced, much as you see the registration instructions in, I don't know, Wesley or something, which people also often ignore. But I tried it as marked on score when playing with this friend's choir, and it suddenly made a lot of sense. So I think probably that may be where the interest sort of gradually came from. Basically, how are these organs played? Because it's dawned on me bit by bit that the way we play the organ now, without wishing to simplify things too much, and feel free to argue back, but I think there are kind of 2 strands. And I think one of them is, I don't know about you, but certainly my teachers were very much influenced by sort of neoclassical ideals and organs and ways of approaching the instrument. So there's that side of things. And then there's also the cathedral world, where the registrational practice is often rooted in Between the Walls organs by Arthur Harrison. Nothing wrong with that, but it's a particular way of playing. Yeah. Whereas in the 19th century, organs weren't played like that. And you got all sorts of registrations which seem completely mad. Certainly even to somebody with a sort of neoclassical bent. Trio sonatas with 16 foots in the manuals and all that sort of stuff. It's not stodgy. It somehow works on the right organ with the stops voiced in the right way. And then in the Bach edition, for example, and it's true of his compositions as well, there are some registration changes where you think, well, okay, well, how's he actually achieving that, given the registration aids available to him at the time? And sort of, I became interested in how realizing Best's registrations affects how you play the piece. How do you employ, do you, and how should you employ rubato to get that stop out there without mangling the music out of all recognition, that sort of thing.
Well, if I can just chip in there, the only thing that I play that's got Best's name anywhere near it is that Mendelssohn St. Paul overture.
Speaking of hard piece.
Yeah, I can only imagine on a heavy tracker instrument, trying to do the correct or authentic registration, what that must be like. But presumably playing this kind of music in this historically informed way is quite instructive to the tempi and overall projection of works like this.
Well, I think so. I mean, the one of the things that interested me, though, about Best's Bach edition particularly, certainly with the bigger pieces, is that he gives you a very specific, he gives you a metronome mark. Okay, that might be aspirational and all the, one mustn't take these things too literally, but nevertheless it's there. He gives you fingerings, he gives you pedalings and all the registration and all sorts of other expression. Whilst in other respects being quite sort of light touch. And trying to piece that all together is really, really interesting. So I mean, you mentioned tempi, but I think it is sort of the nuance, employment of rubato and stuff like that is the sort of the governing factor I've found in trying to put these interpretations together.
When were the Novello editions around?
So the first manifestation of the Novello edition was Frederick. No. It's Frederick Bridge and was it John West? That is 1890s. So it's not long after the Best. The interesting thing about that, about the Novello edition, is that there's much less information presented, much less interpretation by an editor. But there are registration suggestions, but they're sort of generic. So a fugue will start on great to 8 foot, and then you'll add full swell, and then you'll add the great 4 foot, and then you'll add the great 2 foot, and then it says full organ, which at least teaches you that the mixtures are intended to come out with the reeds on the great. But that's it. Whereas with Best, rooted as he was in Rink's organ school and with a continental perspective and perhaps rooted also in a slightly earlier era of British organ playing, Best specifies different kinds of fortissimo, different kinds of full organ. He might say he wants full organ without the reeds, or full great without the reeds, or with reeds but without the mixtures, or he wants a sesquialtera, or he wants high mixtures or low mixtures, all of which you could realise on a large organ, Albert Hall, St George's Hall, Liverpool, Sydney Town Hall, which of course he opened as well. All of those things are possible on those organs. But to an extent are also possible at something like Union Chapel. If you take his grave mixture to mean a 12th and 2 foot, sort of a Rauschquint type thing. Although his instructions in terms of registration are interventionist by our judgment, they are musically judged and varied and tell us something about his taste. And just to be clear as well, what we're talking about here is Best's original edition. So Eaglefield Hull mucked about with it and rather amateurishly in the 18th century. What am I talking about? He had a time machine. No, in the Edwardian era. So not that long after Best had died, Eaglefield Hull got his hands on it. And if you go looking for copies of Best's Bach edition, Abe Books or whichever other website, you'll probably come across that far more frequently than the original. And so Eaglefield Hull is a slightly different matter. And that's when you start getting tuba solos and stuff. And, so it so that's fine. That's Edwardian, but it's not W.T. Best.
No, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the prevailing way of doing a Bach prelude and fugue these days is just on a German plenum. And a lot of organists, even in this country, will just try and do that on any organ they can. And sometimes it doesn't sound particularly great. I heard a recital last night, in fact, where the recitalist did the St. Anne prelude and fugue, and they changed stops quite a lot. And it was quite refreshing to hear. You don't really hear that too often nowadays.
Well, I mean, I remember David Briggs was one of the tutors at Royal Northern when I was there years ago. And he came to teach us around the time that the Albert Hall organ had been reopened, and he'd been one of the performers in this grand reopening concert. And he played whoever's transcription, I forget, of the Sinfonia to Cantata 29. And I remember him saying, I had two choices of the registration. Either I could pull out open diapason number 3, the 4-foot Gemshorn and the 15th, or I could just, play on full organ. I do think you have to tailor to different instruments. I mean, this is one of the things that got me interested in this in the first place. I remember going and playing at Reading Town Hall, and I was playing the E minor 548, just kind of straight, just out of my well-behaved Urtext edition or whatever. And, William McVicker said, the great mixture is not intended to be the top of the chorus. It's supposed to come out with the reeds, the sorts of registrations you see in 19th century editions. And he's, drawing perhaps on Best amongst others here. There are in other colours, full swell with box shut throughout, great to 2-foot, and, all sorts of other different ways of producing a sound. On the subject of new music, the one time, apart from a performance of the Messiaen and W.T, to be honest, the one time I have known that I have caused somebody to leave a concert in a rage was with the Bach G Major Prelude and Fugue. It's not that long ago, when I was sort of I basically was starting to think along the lines you've just described. Like, well, hang on a minute. There isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to registering Bach on the great variety of instruments we have to play. So I gave a recital on a 1920s Harrison 3 manual. And I sort of did that, that thing I just described, that sort of full swell box shut, great to 2-foot. I didn't use the great mixture. I used the box a little bit for the odd sforzando. I used the pedal reed. I wasn't completely crazy, over-registered or anything like that. But there was a person in the audience who got up and left in a rage because of my registration of the Bach on the Harrison. They thought they basically thought, I should have drawn out open diapason number 2 and a 4-foot and a 2-foot and played the whole thing on that, because that's how to make a Harrison sound like a Bach organ, which obviously is nonsense. But this person was so offended they stormed out. How cool is that?
What a diva. Yeah, gosh.
Right, so to draw a line under this section, a little birdie told me you used to dress up for these concerts.
Yeah. You used to. In a sort of steampunk get-up, which, that really delivers the whole immersive package, I suppose, for your audience. And you've got the Phileas Fogg look to you as well.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, Best used to sit at a sort of writing desk before his concerts in view of the audience, and so it's quite fun to do that. There's the bit of this where I delve into these editions and might write an article for the BIOS Journal or the RCO Journal or whatever. But also, I think presenting it in concert can involve a little bit more whimsy.
Well, it brings it off the page a bit more, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm developing that idea. I'd like the idea of including readings from 19th century literature that mention the organ and stuff like that. But
well, I do appreciate you turning up to this recording in your full steampunk get-up.
But I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what the pink hot pants and clogs are all about.
That is that. Yeah, I did get some funny looks walking up from South Ken.
No, I'm just joking. For the sake of the listeners, Tom is actually nude from the waist down.
I mean, RCO chinos and jumper. Yeah.
Right, so the next bullet point I've got down here, it just says trains.
Hey!
Now, I'm going to out you as a train enthusiast, and I'm curious about this, as I know quite a few organists who are also into trains in quite a big, some might say scary way. I have to get the train to work every day, and to be honest, I'm pig sick of how they either never show up, or might as well not show up for how late they are. I guess your attraction is less to do with timetabling and more with the engineering side of things. I mean, undoubtedly there are parallels between organs and trains.
Presumably
there probably are, yeah. But I mean, there are people who are fascinated by the timetabling. I mean, genuinely.
Oh, yeah.
And not just when that train arrives at Paddington from Reading, but, where it went beforehand and which depot it came from, and where, and how many times it swaps drivers. So people are fascinated by that. So how the railway is operated does interest me. The engineering interests me. The social history interests me more and more as I get older. There's only so many books about the engineering you can read. But that is my other main interest, I think, beyond the music. And I do volunteer on a steam engine, indeed. So, yeah.
I've already asked another guest a similar question to this, but we've established that you like organs.
Yeah.
And you like trains.
Yeah.
Therefore, if someone built an organ on a train, would you pass out into another realm of joyful existence?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
but it would need to be the most perfect instrument for that setting. So I think what you'd want on a train in a fairly smallish room is a sort of a little Tudor chamber organ. I realised that there's obviously that doesn't really go with the 19th century technology particularly well, but just in a small room, that's what you want to play. It's not going to work playing best transcriptions on a piddling little organ in a railway coach. It needs to be something from My Lady Neville's book or something like that.
Yeah.
You can do that while you're eating your £7.50 Kit Kat.
I'm going to have dreams about that tonight now. Yeah. The Kit Kat, that is.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to finish this scattershot chat with a few quickfire questions. I ask these same questions to my guests every week, and I'll just be quietly sitting here, making mental notes and basically judging your character based on the answers you give.
Utterly fine.
So, favourite organ?
You know what? It depends what you mean. There's the organs that I think are the best organs, and there's the organ that I have the greatest emotional connection to. So I'm going to take that as my favourite.
Yeah, okay, go on.
And that is actually St George's Hall in Liverpool.
Okay.
By coincidence, really, because the interest in best came later. But one of my earliest memories is of hearing that organ. Mm-hmm. And it is a very beautiful and very fascinating instrument. And some of my earliest recitals, given my, as you can tell from my accent, I have strong Liverpool connections. But some of my earliest recitals were given on that instrument as well. So I've got a massive soft spot for it.
Absolutely.
Really do. Yeah, that's the one I get misty-eyed about.
Favourite organ composer?
I'm probably supposed to say Messiaen.
No one ever says John Stanley.
Poor old John Stanley. I'd like to play John Stanley really well. Daniel Moult plays John Stanley and all sorts of other repertoire. But seriously though, I'm not joking. I mean, Dan brings that sort of 18th century English stuff to life in the most amazing way. He's got a real it's the ornamentation, it's other aspects of interpretation. I'm well jealous of that, I have to say. Dan, if you ever listen to this, I hugely admire that. Favourite organ composer? You know what? Okay, so wonderful as Messiaen is, and I know this is really boring of me, and I know you're going to get this answer a million times, I think I probably have to go... I think Bach is the nearest competitor.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Because there's just so much of it, and it's so different. And I could listen to the Orgelbuch line one day, and I could listen to a trio sonata another day, and then I could listen to the E minor another day, and that's all different. But choosing between that and Messiaen is difficult, so I'm not going to answer your question.
Right. Well, that is one of the questions coming up, so tough luck.
Favourite performer, alive or dead?
Ooh, gosh. I think one of my favourite recitalists at the moment is Nick Wern, who I just think is fantastic. He's just the most fantastic player. He was at New College, wasn't he?
He was,
yeah, one of your predecessors there. I absolutely love Nick's playing.
Great answer, yeah.
Yeah.
Favourite recording?
At the moment, really, really like Terence Charleston playing various pieces of Bird on a harpsichord.
Mm-hmm.
It is a good year for it, and I've always loved Bird, and I particularly love that recording. So I keep coming back to that. So I think at the moment that's my favourite recording. And the other thing I've come back to again and again over the years is I've got a recording of Lorenzo Guglielmi playing a load of Frescobaldi, and it's completely fascinating. I think partly because shades of Dan with the Stanley, he plays this music in so insightful a way. Same with Terence Charleston with the Bird. It's just alive. And yeah, it's fantastic, but it's also music that, isn't my specialism. So it just, particularly grabs me perhaps for that reason.
Composer who never composed any organ music, but you wish they had?
Well, Stravinsky just popped into my head.
Yeah, I think I'd agree.
Yeah.
But he hated the organ, didn't he?
He did hate the organ. Yeah. He's not alone in having hated the organ, sadly. But yeah, I think it's got to be Stravinsky. I can't really think of anybody else.
I think someone like Penderecki would be really cool. I don't know if he did actually write anything, did he?
No, I don't think he did. Gorecki did. There's the piece called Cantata, which is terrifying.
Okay.
But yeah, let's go Stravinsky.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cave-Cole or Harrison and Harrison?
Oh, I think Cave-Cole. I mean, I don't have anything wrong with a Harrison organ.
Yeah, you don't have to explain yourself.
Well,
it's
okay. It's just, spend your life playing Franck would be all right, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Evensong or Mass?
Ooh.
And I suppose with that, the repertoire that goes with it.
Yeah. Okay. I think my preference in both cases would be for early repertoire. Mm-hmm. However, I would enjoy modernist organ improvisation, which sits better in a Mass, arguably. So I'm going to go Mass.
Okay, we'll cast Walmsley aside.
Poor old Walmsley.
Never mind. Vidor or Vienne?
Vidor.
Rhaegar or Cargalert?
I'm supposed to give quick-fire answers. I'm not very good at that.
Don't worry about it. That's fine.
I thought I had to explain everything. This is a difficult one. Rhaegar or Cargalert. I'm going to go quick-fire. I'm going to say Cargalert, which is ridiculous because I know more Rhaegar.
No, that's absolutely the right answer. Howells or Stanford?
Howells, because of the C-sharp minor rhapsody, which I love. Yeah.
Right, here we go. Bach or Messiaen?
Yeah, you see, halfway through my previous answer, I remembered that you might mention this. So, I think I left it open earlier on. I didn't answer it earlier on, did I? Now I have to.
You can give me a politician answer if you want.
I gave the politician answer earlier on and gave my reasons for that, so I'm now just going to go Messiaen.
Okay, fine. And last one, socks or shoes?
Playing the organ. Definitely shoes, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
All right, this is the part of the show where I ask my guests to tell us a little bit about what would constitute their version of organ heaven and organ hell. Could just be a piece of organ music they love or hate, or they could describe simply improvising for hours on end on a cave col that doesn't go out of tune. It might be a bit abstract, like they wish they had a wine dispenser where you pull a little organ stop that says wine and wine comes out. Or to give an example of hell, or just Rhaegar, just playing over a loudspeaker for the rest of time, I suppose. So, Tom, tell us first about your musical ambrosia of the gods.
The first thing that came to mind, organ heaven. I love the diversity of instruments and buildings, blah, 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 and repertoire that we get to engage with as organists. No other musician gets to do that. And a specific experience, some years ago, I gave a concert with William Whitehead, actually, Organ Buchlein project thing, in Erfurt, and played at the organ of the Cruciskirche in Erfurt, which is a central German 18th century organ by an organ builder, is it Volkmar? Not a famous organ builder to us over here. 5 8-foots on the Great Turvicher strings. The Great Mixture is a tierce mixture, 16-foot tierce mixture. So it upends absolutely everything that people thought they knew about registration of Bach, for example, in the 1960s. Because of the, fair enough, because of the Iron Curtain and all the rest of it, these organs couldn't go and be examined. But this is the sort of instrument that Bach knew and grew up with, which is not to say I'm claiming it was his favourite instrument, but it was totally fascinating. There's a flute stop which is literally made of Baroque recorders, upended with metal feet. I've got a photo on my phone, and if this was a TV show, I'd be able to show everybody. Utterly fascinating instrument. And so that was an organ heaven. Anyway, what you actually were expecting me to say was organ heaven is the bird Ut Re Mi Fantasia.
Okay. I must admit, this wasn't a piece known to me, to my great shame. I mean, just goes to show that Rodgers and Hammerstein weren't super original when they did their Doe a Deer. I hate that film, by the way. It's one of the few films I've had to turn off halfway through because it's just so boring.
Is that Sound of Music?
Sound of Music, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have watched it, and I'm not really a musical theatre guy.
No, fair enough.
I've got some friends who work in that field and have sent me recordings of really good musicals that you'd never find in the West End or Broadway because they wouldn't make any money. And I'm partially converted by that. But generally, why interrupt a crap story with even worse music? Why do that to us? Yeah.
Stevie Farr's just released
Rodgers and Hammerstein
a disc of Bird's keyboard works on the Taylor and Boody organ in Sydney Sussex College, Cambridge, for the 400th anniversary, and he told me, quite incredibly, that he's the only one, or he thinks he's the only one, who's released a disc to celebrate the anniversary.
Which is just insane.
Mad, isn't it? I know.
It's just mad. Yeah.
So what is it about Ut Re Mi that speaks to you?
The thing is, I think so much of my response to music is a sort of a visceral thing before it's an intellectual thing. And I fully appreciate I appreciate to some extent the incredible creative genius that lies behind that piece. But the overall effect is just so compelling. And as a result of that creative genius, I mean, what we have here is a fantasia on a 6-note scale going up and down and up and down and up and down, the air it transposes and all the rest of it. But the way one variation sort of bleeds into another, the way the different sort of motifs sort of speak to each other, the overall architecture of it is stunning, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether somebody's played it on an organ and sort of registered it and sort of added and subtracted stops and slightly orchestrated it in a slightly anachronistic way, arguably, or whether somebody plays it on a harpsichord. It is just astonishing. And actually, there's there are various good recordings out there, but there's an article about it by Robert Quinney, another New College connection, of course, on the Bird Central website. And there's a little article about it there, which is worth reading because I think it just basically outlines what an amazing piece it is. Right. So that's worth a read if you don't know the piece.
Yeah, totally.
That's worth a read. But at the moment, it's the piece I'm listening to again and again and again and again
and again.
And again, and occasionally again.
I find it really interesting you should pick a piece like that when so much of the music you play is arguably the antithesis of that.
Well, I don't know. Is Messiaen the antithesis of Bird? There's so many years between them, but some of their motivation, spiritually and creatively, I think, you could draw parallels, I think, if you really wanted to. They're both church musicians as well.
Yeah.
And in the delicate balance of life, there's a yin and a yang. There can only be peace when you've got a concept of war. Tell us about the grisly side of organs. What's your idea of organ hell?
Grisly side of organs. Well, since I gave you two heavens, because I'm greedy, I'm going to give you two hells. Hell number one is bad programming. Bad programming. We could probably have a whole discussion about programming, I'm quite sure. Programming that sells the organ incredibly badly, either because the music's crap or it's just totally unsuited to the instrument of the building. By the way. Yeah, I'm swearing like a sailor. I'm just so sorry. I had forgotten that this was a family podcast.
No, you can F and Jeff all you like.
Badly presented concerts in general as well. It's more than just the programming, isn't it? It's the sort of thing in some recitals where there's no introduction or welcome from anybody at all. Sort of a bell rings, and and you're sitting there, perhaps with a sheet of A4 with this slightly crap program printed, possibly at a slight angle, on really poor gauge paper, really cheap paper, and it's just nothing about the presentation is good. And then the music just sort of happens, and then at the end somebody gives a cursory bow and disappears into the vestry. Honestly, is it any wonder that people take a dim view of organists and organ music when that happens? So that's one organ hell. More provocatively, in terms of repertoire, I really hate Dupre. I'm going to equivocate now because I realise that he was a hugely influential teacher, and if you want to learn how to play legato, then look at Le Tombeau de Titeluse or something like that. There are one or two pieces I like from Le Tombeau de Titeluse, which I learned as a teenager and very fond of. Placare Christi Servilus, Te Lucis Antiterminum, like a lot of other people. Wonderful.
You just beatboxed that. That was great.
Indeed. I beatboxed to Dupre all the time. There are one or two other pieces of Dupre which I have played. But there's other stuff. Even the stuff which I think is probably all right, like the Preludes and Fugues, I'm not sure I'll ever bother playing it. And because you were saying earlier on about the sort of amount of investment required for the Eyes in the Wheels from Lieve Dorg, for example, versus the overall effect, and that calculation just doesn't add up for me with Dupre. And I say that having played some and then thought, I'm not going to do this again. Not just because I got pissed off with learning it, but because I just didn't feel it was worth it. And then I played the last movement of the Evocation and hated that. And everybody people wagged their finger at me that when I said that in the pub or whatever, and they said, oh no, but you don't understand it. It's cyclical. You need to play the first two movements to really understand the third, or listen to the first two movements to understand the third. And at that point in my early 20s, I didn't realise I'd learned the third movement for whatever reason. I hadn't really bothered with the other two. So I listened to the other two movements and found that all that happened is it just delayed the pain. You had to listen to two equally awful movements before the third, which is horrible. Yeah. And I just don't get it. And, it's been a long time since I've listened to recordings of him playing, but it's cold. And okay, he's a different person from a different era. It's stupid of me to sort of sit and judge his playing, really, isn't it? But it doesn't do it for me anyway. And the music, you get a sense of heart and soul from Messiaen, from Vierne for that matter. But Dupre, there's just something, and I just don't get on with it. And I know that there are people out there who really live and breathe Dupre's music, and that includes some people I really have a lot of time for, a lot of respect for. Jeremy Filsall being a brilliant example. But I also know that Jeremy Filsall, who I get on with really well, not that I've seen him for a few years, but he was one of my teachers at college. I know that he takes a dim view of Maxwell Davis's organ music, which I love. So it's fine. We have different people to have different views. That's all right. but I just can't stand it.
I don't have too much to add, to be honest. I mean, I'm sorry to any Dupré fans out there, but I don't really get it either. It leaves me cold.
Yeah.
Unlike the Rouflé, where it's emotionally charged, still complicated, but it's got a bit of heart to it. I just can't make Dupré come off the page, and I know that's a me problem, but although it's flashy and it's impressive, but is it worth the blood, sweat and tears? And for me, probably not. I like the Cortège Litany.
Yeah,
I can play that.
Say that.
Play that one, that's fine.
Yeah.
The variations on an Old Noel, I think is great. I don't play it because that's a pig to learn as well. It's far trickier than it needs to be.
That's on my list of pieces, like the Preludes and Fugues, as I was saying earlier on, which I sort of, occasionally I hear them and I think, maybe that's all right. But I am never going to learn them because they're never going to get far off the bottom of my list of priorities.
Yeah.
You know, I might think, that's all right. But there's so much of the music that's incredible. Bird with Rémi. For a start, the handful of Messiaen pieces I haven't played yet, and so on and so forth. All that Bach I've not played yet.
Yeah. Well, I suppose to round off this section, could you just say one nice thing about Dupré?
I am very fond of Te Lucis Ante Terminum. Or do you mean just one word? Silence would be the word. Yeah. No, Te Lucis Ante Terminum, Placare Christus Ovilis from the Tombe de Toulouse are wonderful. And grudging respect to the Carillon from the set pièce, which I've learned because it is done well. It's absolutely earth-shattering. Yeah. Although it's very hard, so I just wonder whether it was really worth the effort.
Tom, you meant to be saying something nice.
Okay, Placare Christus Ovilis, Te Lucis Ante Terminum, very lovely. Good. Well done, Dupré. Of your 7,000 pieces, there are 2 that I like, and they're both 2 minutes long.
He was probably quite a snappy dresser.
Funny nose, though.
Okay, now we move on to our regular item, organ trivia. And this week, predictably, I'm going to ask you largely about hard and modern organ music. Mm-hmm. It's multiple guess, so I'm not going to leave you in the lurch. And here we go. So, number 1, question 1, an easy one to start with. Which piece, during rehearsals for its premiere, set the organ on fire? A. Volumina by Ligeti. B. The Missa Mundi by Camilleri. Or C. Rosamedra by Vaughan Williams.
I'm not sure I've heard a story of Volumina setting an organ on fire. I've heard it fusing an organ. I've heard another story about the blower shaft. But
Vaughan Williams, then, is it?
Yeah. I'm going to say Volumina, but you know what? There's something about the Camilleri in the back of my mind.
It is actually Volumina. Yeah.
It is Volumina. Yeah. Was that Xavier Duras at the festival hall?
I don't know. I was going to ask you if you could give us any more information.
Well, I know what I can tell you, and I hope I'm getting this right. I'm sure William McVicker told me that the famous event at the festival hall, the shaft, the sort of axle, if you like, of the blower, that the fans, the actual fan itself is on, that warped. And the reason was that you've got the blower, and then you've got the sort of the low voltage electrics, the sort of rectifier, and all the rest of it. So with Volumina, you pull out all the stops, put your arms across the keys, feet across the pedals, every single stop out, switch the organ on. If it's mechanical action, the blower starts and the wind starts immediately flowing through the pipes. And so it sort of warms up to this extraordinary thing. With the festival hall organ, and, if you were to do the same thing at, here at the oratory where we're sitting and talking, or, the Albert Hall or whatever, you'd shove your arms across the keys. The blower would start, then the electricity the action would kick in a little bit later. All the pallets would open, all the sliders would open, and all of a sudden there'd be a vast demand for wind from probably thousands of pipes. And that shockwave in the winding system caused the festival hall organ to collapse. I think.
Well, no.
If I'm remembering correctly. But there's also a story about it fusing and the fire. So that might have been 2 separate occasions.
Every day's a school day.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. Number 2.
Yeah.
Sorabji wrote 3 organ symphonies that are known for being basically unplayable due to their length and complexity. The first one lasts 2 hours. The second one lasts just over 8 hours. But roughly, how long is the third? A. 5 hours. B. 8.5 hours, or C, 10 hours.
Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna be dangerous here. I reckon it's sort of 8.5.
It is actually, yeah. It's only a little bit longer apparently. Although I don't know how anyone would know because
nobody's played it.
No one's played it. Although there's a rumour that Kevin Bowyer is learning it. I don't know if you know anything about this.
Yeah, but
maybe that's I shouldn't say that. But
I know. I've got to tell you, right. So when Kevin first went to Glasgow Uni, When I was his student at the Royal Northern, took the Glasgow job, and the organ had just been done up. And he said the keyboards felt a bit strange. Anyway, Harrison's came back and looked at the keyboards, and they found that the touch was a millimetre too low, which is enough to be noticeable. And I said to him, in a performance of Sarabji 2, how much additional distance would your fingers travel if you were playing it on a keyboard with a touch that is a millimetre too low, given the sheer quantity of notes?
Nerdy question.
It is a nerdy question, but I knew Kevin would be able to calculate an answer, because Kevin would be able to find out how many individual notes there are, because he's got it on his computer on whatever music software.
Okay.
So he calculated that your fingers would travel something like 1.5 kilometres further than they ought to. Over the course of a piece, if the touch of the keyboard is a millimetre too deep.
Crikey me. Have you ever been tempted to learn any Sarabji?
I found... Kevin's got a photographic memory, or something like that. I mean, he's just a total genius on so many levels, but one of them is his ability to just eat music. And then play it so compellingly, just like that almost. At least it seems that way. I'm not like that. I have to work harder. So I started learning Symphony 1 as a sort of experiment years ago. And I realised that I was going to have to just basically take a sabbatical from everything.
Full-time job,
for
isn't it?
It was going to be a full-time job, because and so I just decided this just isn't going to happen.
I don't think I'd get past bar 1.
I learned a little bit of it, not much. It's extraordinary music, and the impact it has on an audience is amazing. But it's not like my first love. I'm going to play the Eyes in the Wheels. Obviously it's much smaller, but I'm going to wrestle with something like that because I totally love it. But I don't feel that passion with Sarabji particularly.
Fair enough.
Number 3. The Symphony of War and Peace by Niccolo Castiglione is a 40-minute work that's nearly impossible to play. It's split into 7 movements named after days of the week, and each day has a different theme and musical style. But how does the piece end?
Oh, gosh.
A. The organist pretends to have a heart attack and falls off the bench. B. A choir sings a Gregorian-style Alleluia, then appears on stage with violence. Or C. A cluster chord is held in the highest registers on 2 foot and 1 foot stops for the last 4 minutes.
I'm going to go with C.
That'd be just sadistic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually not that. No. So in the instructions at the end, it does say a choir sings a Gregorian-style Alleluia. They appear on stage with violence.
Needless to say, Kevin's played it, of course.
Has he actually?
Yeah. And I've seen the score.
It's a really cool
piece. Because he brought it along to the Northern, but I've never heard it.
There's an organist in Texas called Yuri McCoy who's recorded a live performance on YouTube, and he starts by explaining the piece too, so it's definitely worth checking it out if you're interested. It's mad. There's elements of Stravinsky, 12-tone composition, comedic opera references, and Castiglione doodles all over the score too, so he was really having fun composing it. And I think if I were to ever learn one of these rock hard pieces, I'd probably go for this one.
Why's that though?
I don't know, it just seems quite fun in a way, whereas, going back to the Dupré versus Duruflé thing, I just find Sarabji that little bit too academic and cold. It just seems difficult for the sake of it. Maybe that's unfair. I have a question for you on this, actually. So Yuri has said on record that he's really struggled to get venues to take on the piece for performance. And he was in touch with churches, concert halls, etc. No one really wanted to take a punt, even with the draw of it being one of the hardest pieces of organ music ever composed. Is that something you found when you're touring something like Messiaen and W.T?
No, because it's not like I was expecting. I've got some dates for that coming up next year and probably 2025 as well, so it's still there. But I'm not trying to do 30 performances a year of the Livre de Saint-Sacrement, so it's fine. I've found the answer has been yes at the places I've approached, but it's not a huge number of places. So now that's interesting. I've always thought that there are certain crazy modern pieces, which I would probably play if I had a clear outlet for them. Like Kevin in Glasgow, for example. I mean, obviously he's been there for quite a few years now, but he had all his career before then as well. But in Glasgow, he's got his own sort of captive audience and recital series and all the rest of it. Yes. I think I'd need that to do some of these sorts of pieces, I think.
Question 4. Organ arrangements and transcriptions of orchestral works occupy their own space in the realm of tricky organ music.
Mm-hmm.
According to my own scant research, which of these musicians have the most organ arrangements under their belt? A. W.T. Best, B. Edwin Lemaire, or C. Jonathan Scott?
That's an interesting one.
Do you know Jonathan at all?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, he was an accompanist, staff accompanist at the college, Royal Northern when I was there. Yeah. I am going to say, I think best. I think there's so much.
I think you're right. I mean, going by what it says on IMSLP, although there's seemingly no stopping Jonathan Scott. I mean, I don't know how he has enough hours in the day to...
Yeah, it is kind of amazing, isn't it? He's a very talented guy.
And finally, question 5. This one's not about hard music, but I suspect you're a man who can appreciate a humorous name. So which of these is not an organ composer? A. Robert Kundick, B. Oliphant Chuckabutty, or C. Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf?
I'm going to say Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf.
Correct.
Oh, thank goodness. Well, Oliphant Chuckabutty, there's a rather fine tuba tune.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah, I thought that might be up your street. Yeah.
But the Kundick, I've come across the name.
Bobby Kundick, yeah. He was...
I don't know if he's still alive, actually. He was associated with that big Mormon tabernacle in the States, so it's all carnival, circusy, happy music. It's quite good, actually. Yeah, I don't know a thing about Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf, so...
Yeah. No, it's a good name, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Tom. We were here for a good time, not a long time, and that's the end of that. Have you had some semblance of fun?
I have had a considerable semblance of fun. I pity you, though, because you called this thing Chiff Chats.
Mm-hmm.
And from your point of view, I'm a bit worried it was Chiff Listens.
No, it's good. I mean,
to keep my contribution to a minimum is no bad thing. Well, you've been great. In fact, you've been compelling, invigorating, and not a little bit brilliant. Any forthcoming projects you'd like to share with the class, or things you'd like to plug?
New baby on the way, I think, is probably the main project. So I'm going to sort of have to have a family focus for a while. Yeah, there's the Messiaen recording, which hasn't happened yet, but it's just poised to. So my world is very Messiaen for the time being.
You've got a son already, haven't you?
Yeah, he's 2.5. Yeah.
Isn't it annoying when someone will say to you, "Oh, is he gonna grow up to be an organist?" And you're like, "Well, I don't know yet. He's singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star."
Yeah. It's like it's who knows.
My little girl's into. We found a singer on YouTube. He plays guitar and sings songs, and there's a really good song we like called. It's for bath time. It's called "Don't Drink the Water That Your Butt's Been In."
It's really good.
And it's a good lesson too. I mean, you shouldn't do that.
The toilet side of things is one of the most amusing aspects.
Totally. Yeah, I mean
the lyrics. I mean, don't drink the water that your butt's been in. It ain't right. It might be a sin. Don't drink the water that your butt's been in.
Spiritual song then.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
In which case, let me end by asking you, if you had to pick a single podcast to listen to for the rest of time, what would it be? Maybe one specifically about organs and organ music. Perhaps something with a little quiz in it.
I think there's one I've come across called Chiff Chats. Mm-hmm. I think I'd go for that.
And if you had to sum up this podcast with a little soundbite which attests to the high production values and, I'd say, world-changing content, what would that be?
Soundbite. Great chat.
Lovely, thank you. Great, thanks for that totally unprompted response.
Completely ran out of answers there, didn't I? Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Well, finally, would you say this whole experience was more or less fun than a 2-hour concert of Messiaen?
Oh, come on. I mean, we're sat in comfort and we might go and get a bite to eat afterwards. So I think it may be more fun than 2 hours of Messiaen. Not by much, but it's there.
You know how to have a good time, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to have dinner as well. Yeah.
Right, should we go and get beer?
Let's go and get beer. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was what some people might consider to be a podcast. I'm sorry to say that Tom and I didn't go and get a beer after the recording. We went to the local curry house and discovered that they'd recently gone alcohol-free, so instead we guzzled down a pint of our own tears. Should have gone to that pizza place with the organ. So before we wrap up, it's time to answer some of your questions. And let me tell you, your emails have come flooding. Oh no, they haven't. Wait, what was that? Oh crikey, we've actually got an email. This is from Adam. He writes, "Hi Ben, from your experience, what are the main differences and similarities of working as an organist in a Catholic church versus an Anglican church? How do the musical requirements differ? Is there much overlap? Interested to hear your thoughts." Well, thank you Adam for writing in, but also elevating this podcast to a level of professionalism I could have only dreamed of. In a nutshell, and speaking in very general terms, I suppose the biggest difference is just where you put your focus to prepare best for the services. And what I mean by that is, when I've worked in Anglican churches, the majority of my practice time was spent learning and registering canticle settings and anthems, whereas in my current job in a Catholic institution, there isn't too much in the way of accompanied choral repertoire, so I spend more time learning organ pieces. I think in Catholic places, I dare say the organist needs to be a little more tuned into what's going on in the sanctuary and respond accordingly. Perhaps a priest might throw you a duff note and you have to work out vaguely what it is in a microsecond and respond with a congregational response in the right key. There's also more opportunity for improvisation, arguably, in Catholic churches. I think the one thing I really miss from my time working in Anglican churches is managing the organ in efficient but creative ways. Playing something like Bairstow Blessed City and having to use the divisional pistons to affect the dynamics is a whole skill set of its own. To be honest, I barely use the divisionals anymore just because I don't really have much cause to. Anyway, I could go into a lot more detail on that, but we'll leave it there in the interest of time. I hope that somewhat answers your question, Adam. Thanks for writing in. Last week, I played a game of Name That Organ Stop with Richard McVeigh, and we went through in alphabetical order trying to come up with a stop for each letter. And some were easier than others. That nerdy game seems to have evoked some positive responses from listeners, which I'm very grateful for. Terry has written in with this little story. Just a thought for the A organ stop. The Hazel Wright Rufati organ in the Crystal Cathedral, Garden Grove, California, had a stop called Arvella, after Arvella Schuller, wife of the famous Hour of Power pastor Robert Schuller, who broadcast from that church for many years. Mrs. Schuller was herself an organist and had been involved in planning the instrument during the 1970s. Both the Schullers are now no longer with us, and following the Hour of Power's demise and the organ's recent rebuild, I don't see an Arvella on the new specification. How many people can say they've had an organ stop named after them? Well, not me, Terry, although not for lack of trying, and more's the pity, although I'd be fascinated to know what kind of sound that stop made, whether it was a silky diapason or an abrasive regale. I feel it could have told the listener quite a lot about the character of Mrs. Schuller. In any case, great story. Well, that's about all we've got time for this week. If you haven't heard episode 1 with Richard McVeigh, go and check that one out. And if you have heard it, then you can listen to it again on double speed or half speed if you want to spend your afternoon in oral agony. Thanks very much again to Tom Bell, who's been a terrific sport. Don't forget, if you'd like to email in, get typing to podcast@chiffchat.com. Right, I think we can squeeze in just about one more email before we sign off. Oh, it looks like we've got another one from superfan Barclays Bank. Dear Mr. Blore, following on from our email of a week ago, your mortgage payments are now critically overdue. Ignoring this request will result in serious consequences, so please action this as soon as possible. Yours threateningly, Mr. Barclays. Well, if you'd like to help me out of this potentially fictitious scenario I find myself in, don't forget you can donate to me on TipJar. Join me next week for another special guest on the 3rd episode of Chiff Chat. Bye for now.